If you have one of these white belts in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, chances are you've heard some of these 5 myths that honestly can hurt your progress. My name's Christopher, and I'm a brown belt in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu who's been grappling for the better part of the last decade. Let's debunk some common myths that you may have heard in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. The first myth is that size and strength don't matter. This is often told as one of the reasons why you should train Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, because it's the martial art where the smaller guy can beat the bigger guy. And this is technically true. It is possible for a smaller individual to beat a larger individual, but this is when you take into account a large skill disparity. If the person who is smaller is way better than the person who is bigger, they can use technique and leverage to do things like get around to the back, choke them unconscious, because everyone's neck chokes with the same amount of pressure. They can do things like get on the heel and apply a heel hook, because the strength in your leg tendons is not as strong as the strength in someone's body when they're applying leverage to break it. But if the skill is exactly the same, then you should bet on the bigger individual, because size and strength is one of the main factors that will apply to your overall Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu skill. The first thing would be leverage. If you're able to get leverage on your opponent by moving into a position where they are no longer able to use their strength against you, you're going to win. For example, if you had 80 units of strength and you were going against someone who had 180 units of strength, you can put yourself in a position, for example, on the arm, where you're applying all 80 units of their strength against whatever units they can put in their arm. Some guys are going to be strong enough to pull this arm back, and I've actually dealt with that before and it sucks, but if you apply leverage correctly with your both arms, with your legs over top of them, and you hip into it, you are going to be able to apply breaking mechanics. So size and strength do matter quite a bit. You can overcome it, but they're a major factor in determining whether or not you will actually get a submission hold. The second myth is that you need to train every day in order to get better at Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. Sometimes people want to train every day because it's really fun, they're new into the sport, it's exciting, and these people can burn out. Now, I was someone when I first started out who trained basically every day of the week because it was so much fun. I hadn't been able to wrestle like this since I was a kid, wrestling with my little brother and whatnot, but I finally got to a place where I could do this, get my aggression out, get my energy out, and grapple with someone every single day. Now, I eventually found a better balance in my life, but most of the time when people train every single day, they'll burn out. And the real fact of the matter is, if you can train 2, more likely 3 days a week, that's kind of the sweet spot for getting better as a white belt. You need to train one day, take a rest day, and recover. Train another day, take a rest day, and recover. And if you really want to get that extra benefit, try to do some studying outside of class. Now, as a white belt, you have access to all the tools that are on the internet. You can find a bunch of different technique videos, even just passively scrolling things on Instagram. While it may not be the best instruction, sometimes you'll see some fancy moves you can't retain. Overall, just getting background knowledge will start to incorporate into your overall knowledge. You can watch professional matches because there are tons of those available on the internet. You can watch technique videos, again, tons of videos on the internet. If you really, really want to, you can go out and buy some instructionals, but I don't think that's necessary as a white belt. I don't think you have to go out and spend money in order to get better. Use free resources to take advantage of your time off the mats. You definitely don't need to train every day, and I would say if you do train every day, you're more often to burn out than someone who is very consistent. What often happens is people who train every single day get to the point where they start to burn out, and then they stop. They stop training for a few months at a time, and they really fall behind the person who's been consistent 3 days a week for months and hopefully years on end. That's when the skill really starts to compound, is when you've put the time in and you're consistent. Not consistent over a month, not consistent over 2 months, but consistent over 6 months, and every 6-month chunk that you can put in consistency. And by consistency, I mean 2 or 3 days a week, maybe a bonus 4th day a week for an open mat or an additional day of class. You'll really see a lot of progress in those 6-month chunks. Don't measure it week to week. Try to measure it month to month and get incremental growth. The third myth is that you should learn every single technique in order to master it. In fact, I would say you don't even have to learn every single technique that you learned in class that day. When I was a white belt, I was often overwhelmed with the sheer amount of knowledge that was being thrown at me. There's so much to learn in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, and if you are a white belt, you don't know anything, because that's the definition of white belt. You start off knowing nothing. Maybe you wrestled before, but even still, there's going to be a lot of new submission holds, new positions, new techniques, and White belts sometimes feel like they have to learn everything. You actually don't. My advice would be to show up, try your best in every single class, but let go of the feeling that you have to remember everything. Over time, the knowledge is going to start to stick in your mind, but not just in your mind, in your muscle memory. And when you incorporate things in your muscle memory, that takes time. I often like to say that you learn things first in your body, then understand it with your mind. Oftentimes, especially as adults, we have to think we need to understand every single part of the technique. And techniques can have many, many parts to them. Take the scissor sweep, for example. There's a grip here, a motion to pull them back, where you place your legs, the final sweeping mechanic, and then how you eventually transition to on top. You can feel free to ask questions to understand the different nuances of the technique, but what's going to be more beneficial is understanding the feeling of the technique. Understanding what it's like to have that technique done and start ingraining that into your muscle memory. Understand the flow, the whole motion and how it feels, because you don't have to get all the specifics correct on every single technique. And you're not going to learn every single technique either. But if you try your best in every single class to learn the feeling of the technique, learn what it's like to put it in your muscle memory, then over time you're going to discover that you actually know the techniques better than you thought. And then you can start to slow it down and realize, this is where I put my grips, and if I move it up here, it's more effective than if I move it down here. I often get asked questions about a technique. Instead of just telling them off the top of my head, this is how I do it, I like to put myself in that position, do it once or twice, and then observe how my body does it. Because I've incorporated it into my muscle memory rather than learning it up here in my brain. So muscle memory first, knowledge second.
Knowledge.
And you don't have to learn everything, because after, let's say, 6 months, you're eventually going to get to a point where you've learned it in your muscle memory, and you'll start to get a better grasp of jiu-jitsu as a whole. There's a lot to learn in jiu-jitsu, and don't feel like you have to learn it all. This is a spicy one, myth number 4. You actually tapped out the upper belt. Now, you may have. I'm not going to say you didn't, but more often than not, if you're rolling with especially a purple belt or a brown belt, black belts, look, if you're a star Division I wrestler, and you come in learning some techniques, and you really know how to control people, you've been grappling for a decade because you came up through middle school, through high school, through college, you may be legitimately competitive with upper belts. That's common. But if you're a brand new white belt who's never grappled before, and you tap out your instructor, chances are they're letting you get to that position to keep you in that zone of optimal learning. I've made a video about this before where I describe the process of rolling with white belts when you're an advanced individual. What's best for everybody involved when you're grappling against someone who has a large skill disparity is for them to bring their level of resistance down to just above where you are. Because what that's going to do is force you to bring your game up to that level. And since they have this huge skill gap, they can do another trick. And then they have to bring it up to their level, and they do another trick and bring it up to their level. Now, they might go to the point where they let you submit them. They might let you just pass their guard and put them in a good position. But I hate to break your heart, you're probably not tapping out those upper individuals because it's not competition, it's training. If you really want to know what it's like to go against someone who's fully resisting, go and compete. Because in the training room, everybody has their own goals. I'm guilty of this myself. When I was a white belt, I got so excited that I thought I tapped out my instructor, one of the blue or purple belt coaches. But looking back at it now, it's obvious to me that they were just letting me work. Because now that I'm an upper belt, when I roll these lower ranked individuals, I want them to have a good time. I want them to have fun. Now, I don't just let them tap me out, again and again and again. But sometimes I get into a bad position because they're working, I'm training, to work on my defense, and they'll tap me out, and I tap, and we keep training. If they really wanted the full smoke, they could meet me in competition, and they wouldn't be, because we wouldn't be in the same competition pools. Or they could tell me, hey, I really want you to try as hard as you can to tap me out. And you can do that yourself if you really want to test your skill against an upper rank individual, and you might be surprised to find that they've got a lot more skill in their back pocket, so to speak, that they can draw upon. I hate to break it to you, but it's part of the process. And one day when you're an upper belt, you will have the honor of going lighter on these white belts so that way they can learn and you can get better training partners out of them. Because that's what they're doing. They're building you up as a training partner, and it's good. It's not a bad thing. Myth number 5. You should never tap in training, and the goal is always to win. This plays a little bit off myth number 4, but The reality is training for a reason, and competitions are competitions. You should never try to get tapped out in a competition, but in the training room, it's a good thing. Even if you don't have a ton of skill, just try to let go of the fact that you're not going to beat everybody. Even white belts, even when you get your blue belt, if you're getting tapped out by white belts, that's okay. That's part of the process. Because in the training room, the goal is to get more knowledge, but also to have fun. And it's not fun if you're trying to win every single match, because you can't win in the training room. The only win is to learn. Either you're the hammer and it's kind of fun because you're tapping other people out, or you're the nail and it's kind of fun because you're learning more skills. What really helps this is asking the people who tap you out how they tapped you out. Because if you got tapped out and you say, hey man, how'd you do that? And they describe, okay, I twisted the wrist this way, or I got my grips here and I did that, then you learn something. And then next time you can better defend, because if they did this, simply do the opposite of that in order to defend against it. And when you finally get the chance to be in the offense, maybe you're going against someone else who maybe is not as skilled as you. Then you have the opportunity to use those same skills against somebody else, and you get to get more knowledge. It's a long process. It may not be today, it may not be tomorrow, but maybe a few months from now, you remember, oh, I remember when I got tapped out and they did this. So that way, when you're in that same position, you can do the same thing. It just overall increases the knowledge, and what goes around comes around, and you'll eventually have your chance to be the hammer rather than the nail. Bonus myth number 6. Rolling hard every single session makes you better. Sometimes you're going to want to take your foot off the gas a little bit, because if you're going as hard as you possibly can every single roll, you're going to get tired. I've even seen people come in and they go hard every single roll to the point where they throw up. They're giving it everything they have. And jiu-jitsu is unique as opposed to striking martial arts because you can go as hard as you can. You can put 100% of your effort into trying to tap somebody out and to squeeze the life out of them, and they're okay. But if you're trying as hard as you can during every single part of the roll, you're going to get gassed out. And what's better is to conserve your energy and use bursts of maximum effort when you can advance position, when you can go for a submission. You want to modulate how hard you're trying, not just during individual rolls, but overall. Let's say you have a class where you're sparring for 5 rounds, 3 minutes apiece. Some rounds you're going to want to take it a little bit easier, so that way you have the energy in the later rounds to still practice, to get the most out of it. And in each individual roll, you're going to want to take your foot off the gas a little bit, so that way you have energy for the later part of the roll, when you maybe are in a good position and you get to go for a submission, or maybe you're in a bad position and you get to use that burst of energy to try to get out. You may not always get out, but it's better to have that energy in your back pocket than to be so exhausted to the point where you're overheating, you're wanting to throw up, you feel gassed, you feel nauseous. No one wants to be there, so you don't have to try as hard as you can in every roll. I hope you like these white belt myths. If you do, drop some comments. I love reading them. Os.